Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another webinar in the Food Industry Executive Webinar Series. Super excited to have all of you here today. A couple housekeeping items to get started. First of all, we will have a recording of this available, so if any of your colleagues or friends are unable to make it, we will be sending out a recording of this next week, and you'll be able to share that with them. Additionally, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please drop those into chat. We will be answering those at the end of the webinar. And thank you again all for joining. Super excited to have you today. And I'm very excited to introduce IPM. IPM is a consulting firm that works across organizational levels and functions from startups to large enterprises. Through program and project leadership, IPM advises on and executes their clients' most complex initiatives to ensure rapid strategy realization with sustainable results. IPM has deep expertise in business process optimization, operational improvement, and digital transformation in the consumer products industry. Today's presentation is based on their work with the food and beverage companies. I'm joined here today with Drew Hazlett, who is a director at IPM, overseeing consulting engagements and leading IPM's Technology Center of Excellence. He has over 10 years of experience leading technology projects for companies of all sizes across multiple industries in the U.S. government. Before joining IPM, Drew earned an engineering degree from the University of Dayton and served in the U.S. Army. We're also joined by Jason Bonnet, who is a senior director at IPM, where he is the company's consumer products industry leader. Jason and his team form lasting partnerships with clients to plan and execute strategically critical initiatives. Jason holds a BA in industrial engineering from Northern Illinois University, a Six Sigma Green Belt certification, and is a certified project management professional. Also, we have Marcel Reed, who is a senior project management consultant at IPM, where he serves as the practice lead manager for the company's Business Technology Center of Excellence. Marcel has helped multiple organizations with their ERP implementation projects. Marcel holds a BS in industrial engineering from the University of Illinois and an MBA from Northwestern University. He is also a certified project management professional. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will let you guys take it from here.
All right. Thank you, David. So for everyone, I'm Jason Bonnet. I'll take us through a couple of introductory pieces, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague. So thank you for everybody at the Food Industry Executive for partnering with us to bring this together, and really all you participants for joining today. We're excited to talk for a little bit about the importance of combining proper process and ERP together in the food and beverage space. The pandemic certainly has been with us for over a year, and it's caused a lot of problems. Within food and beverage, the companies that we've worked with, it's amplifying problems that already existed, but are certainly just peaking right now. Supply chain is obviously a hot topic, traceability and quality, and really both customer and consumer expectations are changing pretty dramatically. So today we're going to talk about some of the problems and really about how the right processes and systems together can help these companies within the food and beverage space succeed. We're going to talk three things throughout this, three objectives. Why it's important to get it right, so what success can look like, preparation and when to go, how to prepare and decide if a change is best for you, getting the most from your technology investment, what you should consider when making your plans for that technology investment. All right, a little bit of current challenges and trends in food and beverage. Cost and capacity pressure, first column, first topic. There's always been cost pressures, that's not new, but we're in an era with pretty dynamic swings in consumer spending levels through both retail and food services, and actually not always in sync. So ingredient costs, labor costs, and transportation costs continue to climb. Just transportation costs are sometimes the freight cost to get across the ocean is more than the product cost itself right now. So there's a lot of cost pressure. Labor costs continue to be a problem. There's such a labor shortage that there are a lot of factories and bakeries that we're working with just had to shut lines down. I'm sure everyone on the call has some sense for how that's impacting you too. Procurement challenges, volumes, and timing. What's on the water? Where is it stuck? When is it going to get across? There's such a backlog at the ports. And then reaction. Each company's having to react to those challenges with greater ingredient and packaging inventory levels. So altogether, that labor shortage and the increased costs then are really driving product performance issues. It's really hard to hit your fill rates. So you have temp workers, you have people that aren't as trained, don't have the tribal knowledge that most of the older employees have. So fill rates aren't being hit, service levels aren't being hit, and it just keeps adding further pressure onto what is a restricted capacity within a lot of the bakeries. Second topic, that growth in sales channels and really consumer choices. So incredible growth, a lot of different buying habits going on. And what it does though is it does cause some product proliferation. So because there are so many choices, companies feel the need to keep up. So there's demand for shorter product development cycles. When it's unchecked, it adds a lot of complexity to the manufacturing and procurement processes. Adds a lot of cost. You can imagine changeovers, procurement, inventory levels. We had a few clients who really saw an uptick in contribution margin, actually, on the positive trend during the pandemic because for a few select products, because they had to do a pretty dramatic reduction in supply of what they're producing. They had a reduction in the supply they were getting and the labor. They had to focus on the critical few products and SKUs, and they saw quite a bit of margin uptick. So because of it, they're loving it. They've had to consider SKU rationalization or formula simplification projects on a more regular way of doing business every year because they see the results from purely a margin standpoint. The other aspect of the new channels, when you want to reach consumers with new channels, it's exciting. We have a client that is going through it now, but the new channels require usually new business processes. So there's new systems that they have to exercise. It's like a new muscle that you haven't used in a while. So there's a client that is a major producer in volume to big retail, and really large quantities they're distributing to them, they're selling to them. But they recently opened up a direct-to-consumer line, and they're successful in doing it now, promising next-day delivery. So it's out of the same warehouse. So it's really a difficult combination when you throw your business through these different sales channels. You want that flexibility, but it adds complexity, obviously, to the processes. That kind of ties to the next topic, the disparate systems and processes. Companies grow and evolve. You sort of overlook how many systems get added over the years. Warehouse and shipping, running the plant floor, managing operations, financial transactions, procurement, product specs, formulas, quality systems. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of technology changes, and because of it, advantages you can get from these systems, but companies just tend to add them on over time, and they don't really add the business process discipline to them. So it's great, but it's a trend and it's a challenge. And the last thing is just driving desire for greater visibility across the supply chain. We've all lived in a more data-rich world, and we see what the data can do for us in our own personal lives. So then you start to apply it to the business, and you want that same visibility in your supply chain and across the systems we just talked about. So I think the big thing you want is a confidence in the supply chain and really your cost contributors. So when we talk about that confidence, it's really data accuracy, visibility, data aggregation, sometimes sometimes data lakes. I don't know, it depends on people's perspectives on enterprise data management, but data lakes and business intelligence applications. The other drive for greater visibility is around ingredient and recipe management. You want full traceability. You want, from a quality standpoint, it's critical. Reputations are easy to break. It takes everyone knows the old saying. It takes a long time to build them, or a day to destroy them. To ensure that quality, you really want that full traceability across. And today's systems allow for it. You can do it, but it's difficult when you have disparate systems tied together if you don't have the business processes mapped appropriately. And then last, confidence in where your dollars are going. We know that cash flow right now is taking a big hit. All those costs we talked about are increasing. They aren't really going to be reflected in product pricing right away. Companies are holding that off as long as they can, not to send shockwaves through the system and have consumers be, paying for all that right away. But it does take a hit to cash flow. It does impact it directly. So we're going to do a quick polling question. Let me introduce you to Marcel Reed. He's going to lead us through that first polling question. Thanks, Marcel.
Thanks, Jason. So we want to talk a little bit with you, try to get some feedback from you on which of these areas you feel you're most focused on. Jason kind of walked you through all 4 of the different challenges. And so take some time to answer the question, and it's multiple select. So you do have an opportunity to answer any of the 4 areas that you may be challenged in. So if it's cost and capacity, we do see a lot of our clients that are in that area. But whether it's the channel growth, the consumer choices, you have disparate systems and processes that you're dealing with, or you just want, you just have a high desire for greater visibility. Just give us an idea for that. So Hillary should be popping up that polling question for you, and take some time to walk through those and check any of those that apply to you.
Great, I see it up there.
All right, the poll is now live. Please make your selections, and we will present the results here in a minute.
So just so you guys know, we do have several clients that come to us and ask us questions about how to deal with these areas. So we're curious to see where most of the audience is going to fall in these categories.
I have my bet, but let's see.
Yeah, if I'm guessing, I've got a couple in mind that are going to get the most as well.
Okay, it looks like most of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and put the results up here.
All right.
Yeah.
Looks like there's a tie for cost and capacity, which is probably where I was thinking most of you are going to land. But we also obviously see a lot of organizations struggle with the disparate systems and processes, which is the reason why they're trying to look at a new ERP.
Yeah, great.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Jason and let him elaborate on why you got to get it right.
All right, thanks, Marcel. All right, so we talked some of the challenges and trends. Let's set it up a little bit around why you need to get this right. Let's look at the business characteristics and the performance attributes in 3 groupings: efficiencies and transformation, business insights and decision making, and then business continuity. Within efficiencies and transformations, some of the symptoms that you aren't getting it right is maybe you put in a new ERP, yet you're finding some of your functions working around the system. That is not uncommon at all. It is a sign, though, that you didn't fix some of the bad practices before you put the system in. New systems don't solve bad practices. When we talk about business processes around it, I think it's worthwhile just to take a second and talk about what all we're talking about. It depends on your company, but you need to consider procure to pay, order to cash, forecast to fulfill, and really across all of those is the critical S&OP. Now, we've been moving and helping clients move to more integrated business planning because of the data availability, because of the insights you can get from tying your processes and systems together better. But whether it's IBP or an SNOP, either way, it's critical to be able to tie those business processes properly. We worked with a company last year where they put in a full stack new ERP system. Nothing wrong with the system, great system. But as I mentioned, when you don't have the processes first integrated and understood and tied together, you don't know where the data handoffs are between functions. The new system itself doesn't change anything. The company didn't have a way to accurately tie refunds to returns. So they had really incredibly dedicated personnel working in receiving in the warehouse, and they had great customer service people. It was truly wonderful. But they were really working so hard every month to try and tie things out, and they were just having issues. They were issuing refunds without really knowing if they were getting the returns. And so as you can imagine, that's a significant financial hit. Also, it played havoc with their available inventory levels. So a lot of inaccuracy then, it had nothing to do with the fault of the ERP. It wasn't set up wrong. It's just that the processes weren't tied together, so the requirements weren't right. So because when you get it right, you can have a lot of those processes automated. They can be automated. You can automate data validation, and with that you save a lot of time with exceptions being flagged and acted on, rather than people doing busy work or hero work at the end of the month to try to clean. Instead, they're focused on more of the valuable work for them. So I'm going to jump down to business continuity. Next, I'd like to talk about that for a second. When you have the right systems and processes in place, people know their roles, their responsibilities, communication and data flow effectively across the functions. It's the best way to open up those silos. People aren't overloaded. They don't distrust the new system. They don't distrust the data that's coming out of it. When it's not right, it's, an easy example is really how long it takes to close the books. How hard is it? When you have a team dedicated working weekends to try to get the books closed, it's a pretty heavy lift, right? It can be a couple of days, it can be 2 weeks, but we've seen horror stories where it's over 90 days. So these new systems can certainly drive a significant impact in those efficiencies within the process, really giving companies better control over how they're running their business, how they're operating. But I think the topic that I am most passionate about is really around that visibility driving business insights, really insightful decision making. So data generated at various points across the processes then when it's right, are tied together and mapped together. So you have sound data and a sound BI strategy tied to a governance structure. And there are a lot of ways that this properly mapped data and BI strategy then can help you with intelligent decision making. Product lifecycle management, knowing more accurately where all your cost contributions are coming from, what your sales trends and inventory turns look like, food safety and quality, full traceability and transparency, tracking products from origin to consumption. We talked about integrated business planning. Even if it is just SNOP, that's fine too. It's just forward and backward traceability and planning and scheduling, really forecasting out and being smart with your strategic decision making. A couple more: sustainability and environmental impact. You can have a much closer look at your sourcing and supply chain, and your carbon impacts, your packaging choices. And I think one that I'm impacted the most by with the current 4 or 5 projects we've been working on is capacity unlock. There's just whether you're retail or you're food service, there's a real crunch on capacity in North America right now. And so just knowing what you have in your system, in your network, and in comparison to what you need, and being able to make intelligent decisions quickly about that. We all know that automation and capital decisions you want to make take a while to implement, so we have to do it quickly. A couple of points just to keep in mind: reduction in inventory, increased turns, and just closing the books faster, all are nice. But really, this can improve fill rate. So if you're having service quality problems, this is something that you want to do to be able to get that data right. So now I'm going to turn it over before we do 2 polling questions, I'm going to introduce Drew Hazlett, who is going to take us through preparation and when to go. Drew?
Thanks, Jason. Again, appreciate that they're facing. Like Jason and Marcel mentioned, we've worked with numerous food and beverage clients. Our approach, whether it's food and beverage or other consumer product organizations, really doesn't change when it comes to the preparation step. And so what I'm really striving to answer is how you can go about doing this yourself, and how you start shaping your organization in order for preparation to even make your decision whether you want to move forward or are ready to move forward with an ERP project. We all know these projects are difficult, and this is really about establishing your ERP foundation and really about establishing a deep understanding of your business. It's really about building your business case. And what we generally coach our organizations into is it starts with building your team. The team really does need to be cross-functional in nature. We sometimes walk into projects that we've been asked to rescue, or what's gone wrong. And in some cases, they're too focused on one area of the business. Accounting specifically drove the project, and those decisions were the ones that rose to the top, and everything was looked at through one lens, or vice versa on the operations side. This project team is really about driving harmony across your business. And if you establish a really good cross-functional team at the beginning, you actually establish your governance for long-term sustainability of your solution long beyond your implementation and your go-live date. The second aspect of building your team is ensuring that you have an unbiased, dedicated leader for this engagement. In many places we talk, it's the project manager, and they are critical to the success of these engagements. I want to be very clear that this project manager is not the vendor's project manager. It's not the ERP technology organization that you select project manager. It is a project manager from within your organization that is dedicated to this effort. Most of our failures come from the fact that the PM, this was a second or third job for them. They just never got the project all the way through the finish line, and it really became a place where they were losing a lot of money by not dedicating that dedicated leader to the engagement. And then the last aspect is really understanding who your stakeholders are on these types of engagements. We see a lot of organizations that shape these strategies to their executive leadership level. Data, reporting, and dashboards become the focus area as opposed to the processes and the people that are actually using the system themselves. The primary user community for ERPs are the people that are actually doing the work. Their voice is important to consider when mapping processes all the way through the implementation. If you don't do this, it leaves a significant change management hurdle at the end of the project when you're trying to train people and launch a system. So our recommendation is to establish that cross-functional team with an unbiased leadership and with representation from both management as well as the execution and doer level of your organizations. The next key aspect then is really building your business case. And it really is building your business case around your processes. To adequately understand your return on investment calculations and understand your business, it's critical that you take the time to understand your business processes and identify the problem areas within your processes. We educate all of our clients on the necessary step of conducting current state process mapping. It's the number one question that we get back from our clients is, why are we focusing on the current state? I should be focusing on the future. I should be focusing on the desired state at the end of the day. And really the answer is simple. To understand your return on investment calculations, you need to understand what the current state of your business. You also need to understand, you also want to make sure that you don't miss critical processes or critical requirements. And lastly, you want to make sure that you identify all those opportunities for improvement so that you can prioritize them appropriately and make sure that your solution is actually meeting your needs and not just focused on what the future is going to look like. We do get to desired state process mapping in our methodology, but it comes later on in the process. After completing your current state process mapping, this is a period where we are often asked to validate those processes. We're walking the processes. We're making actual observations on how things are happening during that validation step. This is the perfect time to validate and to baseline your metrics and KPIs. This is the time, even if you're not using them now, this is the time to understand what they are, even if they're not being used to drive your business at this point. So this is the point in time to identify what's important from a performance indicator standpoint. Lastly, we then ask our clients, or we walk our clients through a process retrospective. Our most common methodology for that process retrospective is that start, stop, continue approach. Essentially, identify the things that you're doing poorly, your redundancies, your extra work, your frustrating processes, those things, and put that on a list of things to stop. Subsequently, identify the things that you're doing well and put that on your list of continue. These are the things that we really want to maximize or continue doing, or in some cases, have to continue doing. Those are your have to requirements. And then lastly, it's time to start thinking outside the box. Look at what some of your competitors are doing. Look at what other industries are doing. And those can become some of your starts to understand these are things that we want to inject into our business to make best practices. From those 3 points, your current state process maps, your baselining your metrics, and your process retrospective, we can now build your desired state. We can now build towards your desired state. I don't call it by your future state intentionally because systems and technology and cost and a bunch of other parameters could affect what the future state ultimately looks like. But we should start to build with where do we want to go in mind, and it comes from those 3 points. And from that list, or from those desired state processes, is where we'll actually build your functional requirements. And again, from a functional requirements standpoint, I read too many articles, I see too many webinars where they talk about focusing to your differentiating requirements. The reality is you need to focus to your business and focus to all of your requirements. Otherwise, you run the risk of missing critical requirements if you're too focused on the differentiating things that make you different from other businesses. The next aspect is really then identifying your technology, understanding your technology and kind of how you got there. I say about a third of our projects that came to us through, they either aged out of their technology. Another third either outgrew their technology and or grew through acquisition and ultimately ended up in a position of disparate systems. And the last third of our business really comes from poor usage of existing technology. The reality is the reason you're in the position you're in, or the reason you're considering the ERP effort is likely in one of these four areas. There's no right or wrong answer to the reason you're there, but the reality is to understand how you got to where you are. It helps then influence what you're going to do to change and or modify what you do in the future. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about then is, and really want to understand where you want to go from a strategic direction. We walk into a lot of companies that simply want to replicate what they're doing now. They want to have this business continuity based approach. If that is the approach, there's nothing wrong with that approach, but it will result in a lower return on investment. We see higher return on investments when we start getting into organizations that are seeking continuous improvement and or seeking overall business transformation. At the end of the day, taking the time to do this preparation step is critical to the success of your ERP engagement. At this point, we're going to transition back to Marcel for a couple questions just to kind of understand where some of your organizations are at. So I'm going to pass it over to Marcel.
Thanks, Drew. So once again, we're going to get a feel for where you are in this process. So Drew talked a little bit about some of the concerns with getting started and where organizations struggle. So I want to get an idea for where you might fall in this category. So based on how you're currently structured, where do you feel your company will struggle getting started? And again, this is a multi-select process question. You can pick multiple questions just to give us an idea, multiple responses, but give us an idea of where you fall. Are you struggling because you have an issue with getting a cross-functional team together that Drew talked about? Is it a struggle to get the right unbiased leader to drive the effort? Are you going to struggle with the mapping of your processes? And again, Drew talked about the critical importance of doing your current state mapping. So give us an idea of where you fall there. Is it an issue with prioritizing those requirements? And lastly, are you going to have a challenge with overcoming the amount of transformation required? So Hillary has posted the question. Feel free to go ahead and select and take the time and give us your responses.
And while you're answering that too, this is some common areas that we see. We also would love to hear through the chat if there's other concerns, other areas. Feel free to chat us. We'll kind of address those and can summarize those towards the end. These are often areas where our clients are seeking our support or help on these types of engagement.
All right, if you haven't answered already, please make your selections and I will present the results here in a few seconds.
All right, looks like it's a pretty good mix across the board. Vast majority are having troubles with prioritizing requirements or the challenges to solve. But then there's a high amount with developing that cross-functional team and mapping those and mapping their processes. So now we're going to give you yet another polling question. Just want to get a feel for how you would classify yourself as an organization and your need for a new ERP. As Drew mentioned earlier, again, did you outgrow the existing technology that you have? Do you have age technology? We see a lot of clients that have older systems that they're still trying to work with. Do you have too many disparate systems? We did see in the earlier question that you answered that several of you are struggling with disparate systems. Or last but not least, you have the right tools, but you're ineffectively using them. So if you could let us know where you fall there, that would be great as well. And Hillary's already posted the question. Take the time to elaborate on that answer. So again, we see a lot of our clients kind of fall in a couple of these categories. Obviously, you mentioned earlier you have too many disparate systems, but we do see a lot of clients in some of the others as well. So be curious to see where you fall in this one too.
Okay, just a few more seconds to make your selections.
All right. Not a ton of surprise there either. So again, too many disparate systems. And again, sometimes, you have the right tools, but not using them as effectively as you like. And that's, again, areas we see a lot of our clients. So I'm going to turn it back over to Drew, and he can talk to you a little bit more about the benefits of a new ERP.
Perfect. So I do want to take a moment before kind of getting into the most investment, before talking about getting the most out of your investment, to kind of answer and talk to you a little bit of those polling results. So the requirements prioritization is exactly the reason why we talk about focusing towards your current state processes and doing the current state process mapping. Through that exercise and through the process retrospective, you really should be able to drive, and in many cases you can even quantify the areas that are causing you most heartache, right? So by doing the metrics and by doing that, by baselining the metrics, you should be able to actually have a measurable prioritization almost naturally occur by going through that exercise appropriately. So you can actually see the areas that are most weak based through your KPIs and through your metrics, and prioritize those requirements subsequently. And then again, much of what we saw earlier, disparate systems. And we see this a lot in acquisition-focused organizations. We also see this a lot in organizations that think technology is the solution to process. And they end up just buying the next, they Google CRM, they Google a warehouse management solution, and they end up just buying. Could be poor integration, it could be just a poor fit. And so it's not to say that you're not being planful about it, but it's a common symptom of what we see, is that we just throw money at technology sometimes and hope that it's going to bring an answer to some of our process issues, as opposed to, again, building that business case. So a lot of what we're talking about and why we harmoniously tie process and technology together is that these investments, especially the ERPs and the CRMs and the quality management solutions, are more than just technology implementations. They are investments in they're investments in the business, and they need to be treated as such. These aren't just technology projects. These aren't just something that IT goes and works on the side while the business runs and operates on the other side. It really comes down to being very planful about it, be willing to accept change, and being dedicated to doing it right. So what do I mean by being planful? Being planful is not, it starts with that last point, which is being dedicated to doing it right, but it really comes down to these projects are disruptive. They're complex, they're hard, they're going to take effort from your organization to do it successfully. But through adequate planning, you can minimize that disruption to the business. Through adequate planning, you can have concentrated efforts while allowing the business to operate outside of that. And in many of our organizations that we work with, we actually try to minimize team participation during certain aspects of the project that don't require it. And so again, being planful and knowing when with seasonality in business or whatnot, we can plan around those if you take all of those factors into account in being planful. And that leads to that effective use of your people. This isn't a leadership-driven project. It goes back to the point I made on the earlier slide, which is you need to have representation across the business on this project, various levels of leadership. The effective use of people comes down to the people that are willing to contribute. There's no point in just having people on the project just because they're the manager of a group or they're the head of a certain department. These should be people that have the time and are dedicated to getting this project done correctly. And lastly, you should be focused towards a predictable and transparent implementation. That doesn't mean that you tell me that when I come through your door that you tell me that I need to be launched on an ERP in June of 2022, because there's no planning that went into that actual date other than you just saying, I think this is when I need to be launched on the system. It really comes down to going through the planning and ensuring that there's a proper timeline and proper project activities and proper sequencing to actually then attain implementation, and being predictable about it helps minimize those disruptions and helps bring, again, a better attitude towards these projects, which really starts to then talk about change management and organizational change management and your willingness to accept change. We don't like hearing organizations that just like to replicate what they do on a new system or a new platform. We believe that, again, the greatest ROI is going to come from process reengineering. It's going to come from establishing a solid governance for long-term success and sustainability of your ERP. And it's going to come from a complete reshaping of roles and responsibilities in some cases. And so really it's about accepting change, and your team should consider change management from the very first step, from the process management step. That's where, when you're doing the retrospective, you start to build excitement around about the positive impacts that this project is going to take. And you should maintain that momentum as you go through configuration, through testing, and ultimately to launch. And then lastly, you have to be dedicated to doing this right. We often see too often organizations that think that the technology VAR, the value-added reseller, the implementer, is going to be the one that's going to be, they're just going to come in, they're going to do this project for me, they're going to launch, and then I'm going to start working on it. And the companies that do this right are the people that are utilizing, again, they're utilizing their team. They're utilizing the right amount of their team to allow this to happen. We often say we cannot do these projects to you, we have to do them with you. Spend wisely. This ERP doesn't have to be about writing a really big check at the end of the day. Many ERP projects have a very negative connotation that they're very costly, that we don't see all the benefits that we expected to. And it's really about staging and sequencing your spending appropriately. If you have the ability to write the big check, fine, so be it. But you can also go about this by module, process by process, and really approach the project in a very well-budgeted way. And it might take a little longer in that approach, but at the end of the day, you're going to be starting to recognize those returns a little bit faster, and you're going to be, again, it goes back to that predictability. You'll be able to say, okay, let's focus on order to cash and just all of our improvements in order to cash, and then move on to the next process. And really, this is all about establishing that solid foundation for future technology pieces. So we're not up here talking about AI. We're not up here talking about the latest and greatest technology for your lines, or your connected Internet of Things and all that. This is the building block. ERP is the building block for those other pieces. Because it establishes solid process foundation and solid data foundation, those are the pieces that then you can subsequently add beyond that. We never recommend organizations try to take on more than they can chew when it comes to technology. That's what leads to some of these disparate system problems and some of those other challenges. Be planful about it and be dedicated to doing it right. So I'm going to talk, and we're going to recap here, and then I think we're going to try to, the target is to leave some time and hit the end. So again, we were up here to present, why it's important to get it right and how to get the most out of your investment and when to go. So why you need to get it right, again, is that ERP is that foundation. It's the foundation for process excellence. It's the foundation for data to become an asset in your organization and lead to informed decision-making. And it certainly opens the door, and when done properly, it gives you increased visibility in your operations, leading to greater control, greater validation, and ultimately that visibility that many of our leaders are looking for. Getting the most out of your investment is really about assessing your needs, selecting the right solution for your business. Don't just buy it because somebody else bought it. Buy it because it's the right solution for your business based off of the functional requirements that you identified. And then implement effectively and efficiently. We often see a lot of organizations that only implemented 40% of the package they bought. Getting the most out of your investment, that's not helping them get the most out of their investment. 60% waste in there. So the reality is we want you to implement, know what you're going to implement, know the benefits it's going to bring the organization, and implement it in an effective manner. And lastly, when to go. I recommend to every business that now's the time to do the assessment. Following that, you can make a decision whether your organization is ready and prepared. You can make the decision whether you're financially prepared, or you're going to see enough of return. There's nothing wrong with doing the assessment now. Understanding your current processes, understanding your challenges within your business, and then making a call whether now's the time to move. The other aspect then is also determining your direction. If you know that your organization is headed to be a different model, a more of a continuous improvement model, or you want to transform your organization, that could be a huge driver into why now being the time to go. And then most importantly is dedicating the time and dollars to getting it right and doing it right the first time. It's going to allow for the most success. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to join us. We have some time here to answer some questions. Jason and Marcel are both available with me. So thank you.
All right, have some questions for you here. First one is, how do I know what best practices are for companies like mine?
So when we talk about best practices, and it's a great question. Best practices, so many technology organizations sell the principle that their solution is built upon best practices. The reality is best practices the reality is these ERP systems and these ERP platforms are really built to be very flexible. They're selling the same solution to you as a food and beverage company as they are to a mattress manufacturer, as the same as they are to an industrial products organization, potentially. Best practices, I actually encourage organizations to not necessarily think in the terms of best practices, but rather the improvement areas that they're trying to make. So it goes back to doing that retrospective, and it goes back to baselining where they are as an organization. Those are where you're going to see direct impacts to what you're operating as a business. If you are moving down that more transformational route where you are completely revamping your business, that's when we'll talk a little bit more about best practices. We generally encourage to look at others within the industry. Look at where the industry is going, and even tap into those publications and those sources that are going to guide you in that direction. Best practice is a tough term, ultimately, is what I'm trying to say, because it has different impacts based off of what you're trying to do as a business.
I think one thing you can do also is to look at just KPIs. Look at your benchmark some of your critical KPIs with what's going on with your competitors or the segment of the industry. And to Drew's point, that'll just help you really get specific with which processes are failing you or you're having trouble with, instead of trying to get broad into best practices. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. We're just under a $100 million company with 175 employees. How big of a team will we need and how many hours a week will it take us?
Yeah, multi-variable equation there. The reality is most ERP organizations, most companies that are pursuing ERP projects are focusing on order to cash, procure to pay, all the pieces that Jason went through earlier. I would encourage you to break down those functions based off of your organizational structure. So how are you receiving orders? You're going to have somebody, a representative or two from that order management piece. You're going to have a representative or two from that procurement piece. And then from a dollars perspective, it's tough. Depending on whether you're looking at a tier 1 or tier 2 solution, depending on the size, so likely at $100 million, you're probably going to be more successful with like a tier 2 solution. And the reality is those probably $1 million to $3 million would be a good budgetary number for implementation. Depending on what you want to do. Software vendors are very good at changing, not necessarily changing contracts, but changing the variables within the contracts. Whether you go on-premise or in the cloud type solution, number of users, number of functions, number of modules. So it's really important to understand your total cost of ownership and actually do your total cost of ownership calculations in order to really determine your business case. And you can do that with minimal work. You go through that assessment phase, and you can really then start to reach out to these vendors and say, this is what I'm looking at, this is my requirements. Can you start giving me a ballpark? That doesn't commit you to demos, that doesn't commit you to a contract. It starts to give you a little bit more of a feel of true cost and true impact to the business.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Our organization grew through acquisition. We are currently maintaining 2 different ERPs and have been for several years. We're trying to compare operating costs. Is it wrong to consider selecting one of my existing systems and then moving forward?
No. We work with a lot of organizations that they go through the assessment phase first. And from that, the assessment phase really can then send you in multiple directions. You can head directly down an implementation path. For those of you that are considering project rescues as well, saying, hey, we've invested heavily in technology and we're just not seeing the return that we expected. Again, I would encourage you to go down that assessment phase. And from there, you might just go down a re-implementation or an adjustment to what you're currently doing without having to go through a selection again. My question back to that question, which is again another great question, is really are you seeing that benefit from either one of your platforms? I assume because you're doing that comparative analysis and you're trying to understand your operational costs, you probably do have a little bit of a favorite between your system A and system B. That might be the right indicator, and you might have to just then use that as essentially measure their delta between what your two systems are doing, or imagine, and then to make a determination if that's the right system for your whole organization. Cool.
Thank you. Next question: what is a realistic time frame for adopting a new solution?
So adoption is adoption. I generally coach organizations that you can reach adoption. So system implementation and what I kind of view the adoption time period as about 30 to 45 days post go live, and that is you're up and operating at the same, if not more, efficiency than you were before. And I think that by going through the steps, assuming you're going through assessment, through selection, and through implementation, an accelerated timeline is around 18 months. We talk to most organizations that the full end-to-end journey is somewhere between 18 and 24 months. We've worked with organizations that have done it in much shorter, in 8 and 9 months. It really depends on organizational size and really completeness of your assessment. If you know your requirements and you know your selection criteria and you know what you're buying, it comes a lot faster. Implementation generally, from the time selection has been done to actual implementation, is somewhere between six months to a year.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We just went through this effort 2 years ago, and we're still struggling from a process and efficiency standpoint. We don't see the ROI from it. How do I rescue this?
So like I addressed in the previous question, it starts with assessing your business and understanding where you expected to be. So if you didn't do that desired state, if you didn't do, when you went through that selection, if you didn't see where you were, if you ultimately didn't draw out the roadmap for what you wanted to be, or where you wanted to be at that time, now is the time to go through, do that assessment. That can then lead to an informed decision making of whether the package that you purchased and what you have is enough, and you're getting the value, and it's just a matter of re-implementing and fixing. In some cases, it could be adding third-party modules or bolt-ons. In other cases, it could be having to go back to selection windows and reselecting a proper platform. In most cases, we are seeing organizations that if they've bought tier 1 or tier 2 products, they can adapt those to their business properly. So that's the good news in that.
Great, thank you. One last question here. With the recent supply chain challenges, our organization is going through a supply chain improvement effort. How can we leverage our ERP?
Sure, great question. Very relevant, of course. One simple thing you can start with is to just put together supplier portals. So using supplier portals and supplier scorecards, the data from your system can help hold your vendors and suppliers accountable. I'm sure your customers are scoring you, giving you scorecards for your fill rate, your quality, et cetera. Put those in place for your suppliers as well. Use your ERP to help with that. It's a good first step. It's a good way to get your arms around where your problems are and the performance level.
All right, thank you. that wraps up all of our questions for today's webinar. Again, thank you so much, ICAM, for joining us today. And all of the attendees, thank you so much for being here. We will send you the recording following the webinar. Thanks again.
Thanks. Yeah, we just want to say one thing. Marcel, you got something?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment. So we found out that the QR code doesn't appear to be working. So we'd like you to contact us at ipmcimc.com. If you want to reach out to us, that'd be great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.